Greetings Midcoast Ukers, Jeff Weinberger coming at you here with a new ukulele tutorial. Today I'd like to continue our discussion of strumming and variations of strums. I'd like to use today the song You Ain't Going Nowhere by Bob Dylan as the vehicle so that we can learn more about strums and how to take a song and transform it into something more interesting and not just doing the same strum over and over, or not necessarily doing the strum that somebody might suggest. You might see a tutorial by me or somebody else on YouTube. You might be on the internet searching for a strum, or you might see a description of a strum and they say, oh yeah, the strum for that song is D-D-U, D-D-U, or something like that. And for those of you that don't know, D's and U's stand for downs and ups. And so that's internet language for down and up strumming. So D-D-U, D-D-U means down, down, up, down, down, up. Or for those musicians out there that know their rhythms, that's a quarter and 2/8. And we've talked about that in the past. But if you want to go beyond that, you have to take a deeper dive, and I'd like to do that with you today. I'd like to kind of take a deeper dive. I know we're only talking about like a 3-chord song here. You Ain't Going Nowhere has G, A minor, C, and it almost seems like, well, wait a minute, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a simple Bob Dylan song that he wrote way back in 1966, and it only has 3 chords, and he was actually writing that song up in Woodstock, New York, when he was recovering from his motorcycle accident. He was out of the spotlight because he had to get better from his injuries, broken bones and whatnot. And so he was up there in Woodstock, New York, holed up, and writing songs. He was becoming a family man, you know, and so he was kind of settling down, and he wrote this song, You Ain't Going Nowhere. But you might think such a simple song like that, so unpretentious, there's not much to talk about. What do you mean, take a deep dive? This isn't Beethoven, this isn't Stravinsky, this isn't Arnold Schoenberg or Ornette Coleman or something like that. We study it in music school or something, but you know, you can get a lot out of simple music. So let's take a deep dive into this song. We'll be learning the verse and the chorus and singing a little bit of it together, but let's get into this strumming thing that we're talking about here. So what are we talking about? Well, you could do, you know, very simple strums like I have discussed previously, whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, but let's start a little bit higher up than that. Let's start with down, down, up, down, up, down, up. That's a quarter note, 2/8 notes, and 4 quarter notes. The first quarter note takes place on beat 1. The next 2 quarter notes are on beat, 2/8 notes are on beat 2, and then the next 2/8 notes are on beat 3, and the next 2/8 notes are on beat 4. So you're doing a down on 1, you're doing a down up on 2, a down up on 3, and a down up on 4. So that's kind of easy, but that's going to give you a certain feel. It's going to convey, because when Bob Dylan did the song, he did it faster. He didn't record it until much later, like 1971 or so. He included it on an album. He had a greatest hits album. You all probably remember that album cover. It was a double album, folded out, and blue background. Bob Dylan, his kind of silhouette on the cover, singing live. And that greatest hits collection, there was a volume 2 in 71. And that's when this song came out for him. The Byrds did it before that. The Byrds were looking for songs for their Sweetheart of the Rodeo album in 1968. Great psychedelic country rock album, a classic, Sweethearts of the Rodeo. And I heard an interview with Roger McGuinn, and he was saying they were looking for songs for that album. They had some of their own, but they did cover a lot of Dylan songs in their time. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man and all of that. And so they found this Dylan song, and they got his permission. He said, sure, go ahead. I'm not using it right now. He didn't actually do it until 71. But they took it, and they did it a lot slower. They did it in that kind of spacey cowboy country groove that they had going at the time with all electric guitars. Dylan's version is a lot faster, but it's a little more laid back in some ways because it's more acoustic guitar and banjo. So just those 2 scenarios by themselves have a lot of possibilities for strumming. There's a lot of variation right there between version A and version B. And then if you're like myself and you're an obsessive compulsive and way into this music geek stuff, you even might check out a 3rd version, which would be the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And they did a version that was very acoustic. It was on their album. They have a famous album, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? We've looked at the main title track from that album. But they had a second volume with more modern musicians, John Hyatt and people like that. But it's basically an album of them and their friends playing bluegrass tunes and other folk music type tunes. And Bob Dylan's You Ain't Going Nowhere made it onto that album. And they do it in their own way. So I broke down the strums for all of these, and I'm about to show them to you. So that down, 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 up, that would be a great one. Let's start with that. And that's really clean and real simple. Goes like this. So that is unpretentious, but it gets the job done. It's more or less what you hear on the Dylan version. Banjo takes over and does a lot of counter rhythms to that, but the actual strumming on his acoustic guitar boils down to something like that. And then there's going to be variations, which I will talk about. We all vary our strums, whether we know it or not. We don't do the exact same thing exactly the same way every time, especially not for a 3 or 4 minute song. That's a lot of time to fill up, and you're bound to start to change the energy level somehow. But we want to actually consciously change that energy level. We want to have command of that and control of that. And the main thing we use to do that is our right hand. Our right hand is our volume control. It's kind of our dynamics regulator. It's our accenter and highlighter. It's everything. It really controls how simple or cluttered the music is. Our left hand's just simply doing the chords. Of course, our left hand can embellish the chords, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. But let's break down that strum again. Down, 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 up, down, up. So that by itself is simple enough, but you know, you can do so much to that to make it more interesting and have varying energy levels like I was talking about. So if you want it to be really high energy, most definitely accent that 2 and the 4, the backbeat. Really slam those strings harder on the 2 and the 4. Especially beat 2. Even if you do a lesser accent on 4, that would be good. Another thing you can do is something I talk about often. You might even be tired of hearing about it, but it's a great technique and we use it every day. And that's hitting the top strings of your ukulele first and hitting the bottom strings of your ukulele next. What I call the top-bottom strum, the near-far strum, or more recently I call it the boom chicka strum, or boom chick. So that would be great to take our down, 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 up, and just vary it like this. You hit the top strings on the down, you hit the bottom strings on the next down, then you hit all of them for the down, up, down, up. That totally works. Let's see what else is available. If you listen close to what Dylan does after every break, he does a harmonica break after the chorus. He does a verse, he does a chorus, he does his harmonica, and then coming out of the harmonica solo, going back to a new verse, he kind of throws a little bit of the calypso strum in there. And he does that on bar 2. So he might go bar 1 with our down, 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 up, down, up. But on bar 2, he might do, which is the calypso strum, just in a different disguise, in a place you might not think of the calypso strum as being. So combine those 2 measures together and you get a great strum. It has 2 measures and it's a little more complex because it has variety. Calypso strum. Down, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. It's not just for calypso, obviously. Alright, so that's another thing we can do. And then later on, down the line, Dylan does this little thing on his guitar where, and this is also in that same kind of spot after the harmonica solos going into the verse. He chose to use that part of the song to make some variation and to lift the song up a little bit. And what did he do? Well, he took his G chord and he did bass chord, which on the guitar it's a bass note, and treble strings. On the ukulele, it's your close strings and your far away strings. That's how we do bass chord. And then he's going to do, those are quarter notes, by the way, 1, 2, and then on the first eighth note on beat 3, he does a down on his close strings. He does a up on his far away strings. But then he switches to something called a C over G chord, which on the ukulele we don't do so much, but you could just do a C chord. Or even better, what I like to do is add a C note to our G chord, which makes it a G sus4, and you get this. That's a neat trick. So here's what we're doing. We have our G chord, and we leave all 3 fingers down for the G chord, but while we're holding those down, our pinky swings around and grabs the A string's 3rd fret, and that's called G sus4. Sus4 chords are very useful on the ukulele. Sus2 chords also. But if we want to imitate Dylan's guitar lick on that part of the song, we would go like this. Here it is in slow motion. So it's all G, but then G sus4, and then back to G. G, 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 sus4, G, 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 sus4, G. There's a little change right there. Very subtle difference between those 2 chords, but hopefully you could hear that. So that's a really interesting variation that you can add, just like Dylan did in that same spot, or you can add it anywhere. You feel free to add that whenever you're playing a G chord. All right, and then finally the Byrds, when they did it in '68, again on that album Sweethearts of the Rodeo, which was kind of psychedelic cowboy music of the time. Really interesting album. You should check out all the songs on that album. It's just a classic. But the way they did it was much simpler. They did it a lot slower than Dylan. Dylan did it pretty fast, actually, but his was more acoustic and banjo-y. Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was definitely more acoustic and kind of simple, but I'll show you that one in a minute. But the Byrds was this simple. This is what Roger McGuinn did, while the other guy, maybe Clarence White, I can't remember who it was, but the other guitar player kind of played fills and country twangy stuff. But Roger McGuinn, while he was singing it, just went like this. It couldn't possibly be simpler. And what he does, or what we're going to do, he did bass chord on a guitar. On the ukulele, we're going to do near, far, boom, chick. That's all it takes. You might think, well, wait a minute, that's not very interesting. That's kind of a boring strum, but it worked for Roger McGuinn. They had a pretty big hit with that song. And that's actually the version that I'm modeling Midcoast Ukes' version after, is the Byrds. More so than Dylan's and more so than Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. So there you go. The simplest version wins in this case. So again, it was just boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick, boom, chick. Keep in mind they had a drum kit too, the Byrds. They were a full-fledged electric rock and roll band, and so they had a little more sound going on that allowed Roger McGuinn to play more simply. Plus he was singing, and as we all know, we discussed this before, we simplify our strum when we sing so we don't get confused and tangled up in the strings and lost in the beat. It's better to simplify your strum while singing and then fancy it up when you're not singing. So the Byrds version's really interesting in that way, that it's actually simpler than the Dylan version. And then finally, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. What they did was bass, chord, chord, which on the guitar, that's all well and good. On the ukulele, that's going to be near, far, far, and the far at the end. That's a down strum on the basically all the strings, and an up strum. You can do just the far away strings too, though. So that gives you this. Yet another variation of this same strum. All 3 recordings of this are exactly the same song, with just slightly different interpretations, but very different strums. And sometimes the strum is a function of the tempo. If the song is really fast, you might not be able to swing your arm fast enough to do something fancy, so you might simplify because of the fast tempo. Plus, complexities tend to get blurry and not so clear when the tempo's fast. Not to mention that they're hard to play and hard to keep up with. But when a song is slow, you have a lot of space and a lot of room to elaborate and fill in if musically appropriate. You shouldn't always just play the busiest strum for the sake of it just because you can. Sometimes a simpler strum is better, as we saw with the Byrds version. So let's play a round of You Ain't Going Nowhere. Let me call up the song here. And there it is, in all its digital glory, from the Midcoast Ukes website. Here we go. Intro, verse, and chorus. 1, 2, 3, 4. Clouds so swift, rain won't lift, pavement closed, railings froze. Get your mind off the winter time, you ain't going nowhere. Here we go. Ooh, ride me high, tomorrow's the day my brides are gonna come. Whoa, whoa, we're gonna fly down in the easy chair. So that was fun because it was simple, because it was only 3 chords, and I was able to really play with it. You probably heard me do 2 or 3 of the ideas that we talked about today, and maybe a couple ideas we didn't talk about that we'll save for later videos. All right, Midcoast Ukers, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have a little more insight into strumming, and I'm really enjoying making these for you. I hope you enjoy watching them. Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you all on the 14th when we have our big, huge jam. All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.